Alright, time to come up with a new concept for D&D campaign, or in this case, an old concept. Now, everyone, I'm sure if you want to go back and check my video on these Lone Wolf books and everything, Joe Deaver, the creator of these adventure books, actually based it off his D&D campaign way back in like a second edition and everything. So you do have like a whole complete world and everything. So like here's if you want to pause the kind of screen or screenshot this or whatever, and this is like the northern part of like his Magnamund world. So mostly you start off up in this area, or as I get this right in this pretty much area and right there in the first book. So each book, this is the first book, and of course it's got the old artwork and everything. So you can see where you start off. So a small part of the world. So he actually did use psionics. So that's what the Kai Lords, their powers are from. So they're pretty much like the psionics of that world. But you also got magic users. So you got the Order of the Crystal Star, and so they're your primary mages and everything, or wizards and stuff. So now, how to update that into a 5th edition? To my knowledge, there is no psionics source books for 5th edition, so you might have to go back and grab the 3rd edition book and kind of update it, do some legwork as a DM to kind of okay, this is the stuff in 3rd edition, and then kind of like I said, do legwork to kind of shift it into a 5th edition, because the way the gaming system is set up, it's slightly different and everything. So now it might be easier with the 3rd edition and stuff, just be okay, well, I got this, so it's the D20 system, so I'll be able to be just jump right in and do this, which would be easier to kind of, if you wanted to do it a Pathfinder sense, it would be easier to shift into a Pathfinder, because even 2nd edition Pathfinder, it's based on 1st edition, based off of it, and then 1st edition is based off the D20 system. So there are several different options on how to introduce something this into a D&D campaign. So now there's a couple different books right here I have. So you start off with book 1, and the first 5 books you learn you're in a sense learn the basic skills and everything, and each book is in a sense an adventure unto itself. So in a way, adventure books like this are kind of a solo adventure or solo D&D campaign that you can do on by yourself. But the idea of introducing something like this into a D&D campaign, or reintroducing it, like I said, because Joe Deaver based it off of his actual D&D campaign, you'd have to get into the whole the psionics, because that's what like I said, the Kai Lords are derive their powers from. You already have the whole world set out before you. So like I showed, you have the whole map and everything. So of course, this is just the northern half of the world, and so you can always just Google the lower half, because that's basically just what I have to be able to reference and everything. So, but you don't need a whole lot and everything. So like I showed with the first book, just a small section and everything. So it gives you a good concept of just starting small and then building out and everything. So especially if you're brand new to doing a campaign and everything, you can start off small in the first book, and kind of maybe get a ragtag group of people together and use the books as inspiration. So maybe you're not going through the books per se, but you're maybe using the backstories and Lone Wolf himself has, while he's off having his adventures, you could be running a whole group and running through the events that are happening through all books. Here's book 11 or anything. So you could in a sense have a whole a campaign already set up for you. You just matter of just plopping your D&D campaign in this world and everything. So that like I've mentioned in other videos, and especially the adventure books, the great thing about stuff like that is a lot of the legwork is already done for you. So you don't necessarily have to for instance, you don't necessarily have to sit here and draw up a world map and kind of okay, this is the history of this section, this is the history of this section, and this is the history of the world, and like, okay, well, these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, and like, that this is how they all interact, and like, and this is how each kingdom is set up, and like, it removes a lot of the legwork. So like, you can use these books as a reference point for like pretty much like a, okay, so here's all the work. Let me get in the community. Let me start getting ideas, and like, okay, who start asking questions online, like, okay, who's who, what's what type of deal. So that way, like, you get the background information, so it makes it a lot easier to get into it. So like I said in the beginning of this, the only thing you might have to do like a bit of legwork for, if you were to do it like if in 5th edition, is kind of like come up with like the psionics and everything, because to my knowledge there aren't any like psionic handbooks out there now. People can drop in the comments and tell me like hey, look, there's actually this book and everything. So like, I mean, personally, I haven't come across anything yet for 5th edition when it comes to psionics and everything. So if there isn't anything out there, then like that would probably be a good idea to get into, like for some, maybe like if Wizards of the Coast actually got their heads out of their asses, like, oh, hey, here's a new concept and everything, let's start doing something like that. But that was a whole nother story and everything. So, but anyway, like that, like I mentioned earlier, you could use like I know there's a 3rd edition psionics handbook that's out there, so like you could pick up something like that and everything, and kind of like do some legwork to kind of update it to 5th edition and everything. So that's the kind of like the roundabout way on having to do it yourself, and with doing the legwork with creating psionics for your Kai Lords and everything. So now the premise of these books, though, of course, is Lone Wolf is the last the Kai Lords, starting in this book. So if you were, like I mentioned, if you were going to use like the books as a backdrop and kind of like have a party that's like while Lone Wolf is off on his own adventures, you could get away with not having to do like the psionics and everything, because like the way the books are written, like Lone Wolf's the sole survivor of the Kai Lords. So you could use these books as like a backdrop to run a campaign to kind of introduce the psionics as maybe as a demon, as you're starting to like create like build out the psionic system and everything. So that way, like after like your first campaign, as you're building out the system and everything, you can then introduce like, oh hey, now that Lone Wolf's starting to rebuild the order and everything in like the later orders, like the Magna Chi series or even the Grandmaster series, you can start introducing like the psionic characters, like maybe like someone wants to create like a character that does psionics, and then they can introduce him like, okay, well, he's now introduced to the Kai Lords, and maybe like create like a whole new character in your second campaign or everything. So you could this is just like kind of like using like the Final Fantasy, going into like the new TTRPG for Final Fantasy 14, and of course like the last video I did kind of using the concept of Hero Quest from a board game to TTRPG. This is kind of like a different concept of using adventure books to like a TTRPG. So like for instance, like if you're sitting at home and you've been doing like maybe just not these adventure books, but maybe you're doing like another type of adventure book series, and you want to incorporate that into like a D&D campaign. Here's a concept like, okay, so like if you're using something different, then like you would have to like see like, okay, how do I pull this into like the 5th edition? So I'm using this just as a reference because this is what I'm familiar with for adventure books and everything. So like I mentioned with the psionics, you'd have to kind of do your own legwork to be able to create a whole system based on 5th edition, to my knowledge. And so like if people want to correct me, like I said, jump in the comments and be like, oh hey, look, there's actually this book, and get on with that as I'm reiterating the same stuff and everything. But I'm just kind of introducing this as like a concept where like if you haven't gotten to TTRPGs yet and everything, but like my Hero Quest, you're into board games, well, I want to bridge the gap. Well, okay, well, I'm maybe into adventure books, I want to bridge the gap into TTRPGs. Here's a concept. So like you can use a world you're familiar with, and like maybe like find a group and like, hey, look, is there something we can do to incorporate this in a campaign? Like if you're a brand new player, and like introduce like it's like a group, and like an experienced DM might be like, oh hey, this is kind of a good idea. Let me see what I can do and run with it and everything. So they might say, hey, do you mind if I borrow your books? And like they go through them, and like they start with book 1, then work all the way up to book 11, and I got all the way up to book 20. So now there's 21 through 30 are out or coming out and everything. So we could get into that. So that way the DM himself could get a good idea of like the whole background, the backstory, the characters, the who's who, the what's what, and so that way like they pull you in, and then like, okay, well, you're familiar with this world, and so maybe you could write like a higher level character as they're introducing the rest of the characters as lower level characters, and run with it, and kind of like run a whole new different campaign based on like a adventure book. So this is like a kind of taking like a board game to ttrpg concept, and shifting it gears to like showcasing, oh hey, look, you can kind of do the same thing with adventure books. Use the adventure book idea, take it to the ttrpg realm, and kind of like go from there. Now of course you can also like do it like vice versa and everything, so like a ttrpg to board game, or ttrpg in this case to like an adventure book. Like I said, Joe Deaver based all these adventure books on his D&D campaign, so you could do back and forth, which is a lot easier. So like I know in like some of the videos I've done like the Strixhaven and like Ravnica, it's kind of hard to do like a ttrpg card game, but it is, like I said, easier to get the card game to ttrpg. So like stuff like this is a lot easier to do vice versa type of do back and forth. So this is just kind of like introducing a new concept and everything for like oh hey, here's an idea, let's try and run with this. So now it doesn't necessarily have to be Lone Wolf adventure books. It could be an adventure book that you as an individual are more familiar with, that like especially something that I might not have necessarily come across.